I need to get out! I have to get out! I exclaimed, my heart racing as I jolted awake. Gasping for air, I sat up and scanned my surroundings, feeling disoriented and confused. I found myself on my front porch, lying on my back, and it took me a few seconds to regain my bearings. As I brushed off the dirt from my black jeans, I noticed that my clothes were covered in soot. My front door appeared to be made of charcoal, and it was locked, leaving me stranded outside. I coughed, and my glasses fell to the ground, shattering on impact, but I could still see clearly. The thumping in my head intensified, and as I massaged my temples, my fingers grazed over a scarred area of my skin. Frantically searching for an escape, I stumbled towards the nearest window and peered through the grime. A grotesque figure stared back at me, and I recoiled in horror. Tears streamed down my bloodshot eyes as I touched my scarred face, unable to comprehend the changes that had occurred. I needed to escape this nightmare, to get out of this place before it consumed me entirely. As soon as I caught sight of the scene, bile surged up my throat, and I took off running. Despite my lack of athleticism, I pushed myself to keep going until a van nearly hit me, forcing me to jump out of the way. I shot the reckless driver a middle finger before slowing down and continuing down the path. As I rounded a corner, I collided with my colleague, Peyton. "I'm so sorry, Peyton, I didn't see you," I stammered apologetically, but his expression twisted into anger. "Pay attention to where you're going, would you?" His piercing blue eyes darted around, scanning for something or someone. Confusion flickered across Peyton's face as he turned in circles, searching for the elusive figure. I called out to him, hoping to get his attention, but he merely shrugged and shook his head. Must have been a leaf or something. A leaf? What was happening? As I run down the street calling out his name repeatedly, I begin to feel a sense of desperation creeping in. However, as I realize that my efforts are in vain, I give up and start to feel invisible. I cannot help but wonder why he was avoiding me. Feeling overwhelmed, I cover my face with my hands and take a few shaky breaths in an attempt to calm myself. All I want is to be home, away from the confusion and frustration. Suddenly, a woman passes by, exhaling smoke from her cigarette. I am taken aback as a clear vision overwhelms me, causing my eyes to widen in shock. Later, as I try to get some rest, my dog Mackenzie's barking jolts me out of my slumber. Despite being half asleep, I scold him and make a mental note to withhold treats, knowing that I have an early meeting the next day. As he continues to bark and jump on my bed, I realize that it feels unusually warm, and there is a lingering smell of smoke. As adrenaline surged through my veins, I bolted out of my room and dashed straight to Effie's room, where she was holed up. I had noticed that the fire had originated in the main living room as I raced past the scorched sofas. Bursting through the door, I came to an abrupt halt when I saw her ex-boyfriend, Flint, by her side. She had fashioned her sheets and clothes into a makeshift rope and was securely hanging out of her open window. "I spotted the fire from a distance and rushed over immediately," Flint said, as he lowered Effie to the ground with utmost care. Although I was tempted to probe him further about his whereabouts, time was ticking away like a burning candle, and I couldn't afford to waste any more of it. My lungs were beginning to fill up with thick, suffocating smoke, and the sound of my home, where I had lived for 7 years, being reduced to ashes, was almost unbearable, making me feel like jumping out of the window. As I reeled in the rope, I motioned for Mackenzie to approach Flynn. As my beloved pet descended, I spotted a box of matches on Effie's nightstand. Swiftly, I snatched them and pressed them into Flynn's face. "What are these doing here?" His eyes flicked towards a corner of the room, and I followed his gaze to a large, empty gasoline bottle. I remembered the last conversation I had with Effie, just that morning. She had forgotten to pay her rent again, and I had threatened to evict her since it was the 3rd time this year. In response, she had screamed at me, accusing me of being bound for hell. The truth dawned on me, leaving me vulnerable for a brief moment. In that moment, Flint took advantage of me. He grasped my arm, spun me around, and pressed it against my back. "Effie always complained about you, you know. She said you were a thorn in her side, and only after her money. She never even liked you. So, I intervened and came up with a plan to rid ourselves of this little issue," he explained. I struggled to break free, but his grip only tightened. He gripped the back of my neck and forced me to lean out the window. I could hear the screams of people witnessing the raging inferno and the cold autumn air piercing my face. In a moment of terror, I cried out, but then suddenly found myself back on the street. I felt frozen in place, slowly comprehending what had just occurred, as tears streamed down my face. It has been a week since my death, and although a few people have placed flowers around my old home, and my parents have visited frequently, seeing them only adds to my sorrow. I try to get their attention by pushing a bouquet of flowers over, but to no avail. Effie brought Mackenzie over twice, and I discovered that dogs can sense ghosts as he patiently sits, wagging his tail excitedly. I had hoped to encounter other ghosts, but I have yet to do so. Will my dismal, charred existence be one of solitude? As I glide along the river, my favorite spot from childhood, I often contemplate this question. However, today, I noticed a couple of teenagers playing by the riverbank. As I passed by, I watched them wistfully, longing to wave or ask how their day was, but I knew I was as invisible as, well, a ghost. Lost in my thoughts about the living, I didn't notice the elderly lady. Will I ever understand why the living can feel when ghosts make contact? It's a question that often crosses my mind, leaving me pondering for answers. Apologizing out of habit, I quickly retract my words as the woman in front of me reassures me with a warm smile. However, as I return the gesture, a sudden change in my expression catches her attention. Without missing a beat, she introduces herself. I'm Freya Persephone, a professional medium.